10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 173. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 173 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. My name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of the show. So glad you're here. Hope you've been having a great week and hope you're ready to get into yet another Tune of the Month episode. I always love doing these and I know that all of you out there love these episodes as well. So we're back with another one. And this month we're going to go over one of my favorite Thelonious Monk tunes, Well You Needn't. Get into it and talk about how to handle these very unique chord changes. So a couple items of housekeeping before we jump in. If you want to get the PDF to this episode and every other episode that we've ever done, you can head over and pledge your support on Patreon for only $3 a month. You can get access to every PDF we've ever put out on this show and a lot of other benefits over there as well. And you can have that warm, fuzzy feeling that you are supporting the podcast and keeping these episodes coming at you every week in high quality. Really appreciate everybody over there that has pledged their support, and we definitely could not do this without you. So that really means a lot to us. It actually means the world to us. So I've got one person to thank this week for signing up. Thank you to Alejandro for becoming a member of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. So if you'd like to sign up, join Alejandro and the over 250 members we have on Patreon. Just go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and that will bring you right over to Patreon where you can get signed up and you get instant access to all of that stuff. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite Thelonious Monk tunes called Well You Needn't. And Monk was really known for these non-traditional chord changes that he wrote. And this tune, I'm sure a lot of you out there have played this tune or really enjoy this tune. This tune is a perfect example of those non-traditional chord changes. So let's talk about the form real quick before we jump into it. And just understand the layout of this tune before we get into the nitty-gritty of what I want you to actually work on over this. So this tune moves in half steps. The A sections start on a concert F7 for one measure, and then it moves to a concert G flat 7 for the next measure, and it just goes back and forth in between those chords. So what we see is basically just half-step motion. And the entire tune is based off of this half-step motion. Even the bridge is based off of this. And one note, there are two sets of chord changes that are widely played for this tune. There was the original Thelonious Monk chord changes, and then Miles Davis did it with some different changes. I'm using the original Monk changes, so this might be a little bit different than what's in the real book, but this is the way that I learned it, and this is the way that I really like to play it. So just a note, if these chord symbols clash a little bit with what you're used to, that's the reason why. So anywho, we're going to be focusing on the A sections. This is an A-B-A tune, and we're just going to focus on the A sections because the bridge is super complicated. It takes the half-step chord motion to the extreme. So we're not going to quite get there on this episode. Maybe we'll do something in the future where we talk about the bridge, but I think if you just focus on the A sections, you're gonna get a lot of the skills to play over these half-step sliding chords, and then you can transfer those to the bridge a little bit. You can also study the etude that I've written for you this week and figure out some of the stuff that I've written over the bridge that I enjoy, and you can kind of come up with your own exercises. But we're really just going to be focusing on the A sections for this episode. So the unique challenge that this one presents us is that we kind of have to play in two completely unrelated keys, right? The keys that are a half step apart from each other are as different as you can get. They're basically the polar opposite of each other. But it does provide us with some opportunities to play some cool stuff. Now, in this show, we talk a lot about motives, right? We talk a lot about playing an idea and repeating it so that there's some kind of thread to our solo that the listener can follow. We've talked about that so many times over the course of 173 episodes, and we're going to continue talking about it today. And I think that this tune is a perfect opportunity to do that. So if we have these chords that are a half step apart, it makes sense that we can play a motive, and then we can play that motive a half step up, and then we can kind of develop lines off of those motives, and that's going to give us a starting point to soloing over this tune. I think a lot of times what people will do is they'll play something that they know in F, and then they know far less in the key of G flat, but they'll just automatically go to something that's under their fingers, something that's easily accessible in the key of G flat. And when I hear people do this, it's kind of obvious, right? It's kind of obvious that that's the way that they're playing. So what we're going to try to do is develop some flexibility by playing the same thing in the key of F as we are going to in the key of G flat. So what this will probably do, my guess, is that it's going to kind of expand your skills in the key of G flat, which would be really good for you. So F being a very familiar key, G flat being a not so familiar key, we're probably going to play some really cool stuff over F, and then we're going to force ourselves to play that over the key of G flat. So what I've done is I've come up with 3 examples of these motives, and I've used the first 4 measures of the form as a place to practice this stuff. So if you grab your PDF, the first page, let's check out these 3 examples that I provided for you. So I've started off with an extremely powerful but simple example to show you that you don't need to do anything super complicated to make this effective. So let me play the first example for you, and then we'll talk about it. So you can hear how simple that is, right? Let's look at it. What am I basically doing? Over the first chord, I'm just playing off of this idea of 3 to 5. Then I'm coming back to 3. And then I'm doing 3 to 5 on the second chord. It's about as simple as it gets, but it's really effective. And then you'll notice in the last measure, the fourth measure, I do something just a little bit different. And that's what I like to do with these 4-bar motives, is I'll play basically the exact same thing for the first 3 measures. And then on the fourth measure, I'll just switch it up a little bit to kind of tag the end of whatever motive I'm working on. And I think that that can propel you into, the rest of your ideas, so you can develop that motive into something completely different. Let's check that one out one more time. So you can hear, very, very simple. That's a great way to get started. All right, let's look at example number 2. Let's listen to it first, then we'll talk about it. So you can hear on that one, the basic idea is 5, 4, 3, 1. So I'm just playing the triad, but I'm putting a passing tone between the 5 and the 3. Then I do that exact same thing over measure 2, but I change up the rhythm just a tiny little bit. And then in measure 3, I do the exact same thing that I did in measure 1. And then again, I tag it in measure 4 with something a little bit different. I just go up to the 5th on the G flat chord and just hang out there. Let's listen to that one more time. So you can hear that motive. Sounds exactly the same, just a half step up. All right, and then the third example appears to be a lot more complicated, but it's actually not. There's just more notes in there. It's still a very, very simple motive that I'm just transposing up a half step. Let's listen to it first. So there's more notes, right? I mean, the measure is filled with notes, but can you tell what it is? I'll give you a second. All right, you figured it out. It's just triads. It's just an F triad and then a G flat triad. Then I come back to an F triad. And then again, I tag it in measure 4 with something a little bit different. But it's still just chord tones in measure 4. Check it out again now that you know that. So this stuff is very simple, but it does take some work and it does take some thought, particularly, again, just because you're moving in half steps. We're so used to following like circle of fourths and having most of the chords in a tune related somehow. These are pretty unrelated, and that makes this tune pretty tough to sound really good over. But with some work, you'll really learn to love this tune. And again, the bridge is really hard, but we'll get to that at some point. But yeah, this is basically how I would approach this tune. And then when I started getting more used to the changes and I started getting more fluent in playing in these two keys, then I would start to create some longer lines that don't necessarily rely on motives. As you get deeper and deeper into your solo, you may want to move away from the motivic style of playing and play some longer lines. But I think if you start with the motive-based stuff, you're going to have a lot more success when you look to go towards those lines that cross the measure. You know, you'll discover all of these different notes that connect the two keys, and you'll start to develop some really cool fluency over this tune. So as usual with the tune of the month, I have written a one chorus etude that puts some of these examples into action, as well as uses a bunch of other material. So I'm going to finish up the episode by playing the etude for you. Remember, I have this in all keys: concert, bass clef, B flat, and E flat, at our Patreon site. So if you want to get your hands on the etude, get full value out of this episode, you can sign up by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, going over, pledging your support. Okay, I'm going to leave you with the etude. Any questions, drop them in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson community Facebook group. That's where we have all of our discussions. And have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you next week with some brand new episodes. Bye.